Good morning. I'm Prince Michel de Yougoslavie. I'm the grandson of the last king of Italy, and I'm also a student of Alain Forget. I am very happy to interview Alain this morning and to introduce you to his work.
Good morning, Your Holiness.
Um, I've been studying with you for the last 6 years. We met at an art show where I was exhibiting my photography, and you gave me your book, and I read it both in English and in French. And I was really interested to know more about you. And I remember I called you and I came to visit you during the summer in Monaco. And then you offered me to participate in the group. And I want to talk about what you've done, about the group. And I think it is very important for people who are looking at us to know about you and to understand. So I'm going to ask you a few questions, if you don't mind.
I'm absolutely open.
Thank you.
Absolutely open, Michel.
Thank you, Alain. My first question is, how did you get introduced to metaphysics?
Well, I was 21 and wandering in a bookshop in Paris, I bought the Bhagavad Gita, read the book, and something clicked. And what really did click is life is a game. There must be a rule to understand. Is there a rule to understand? And it got me into discovering what was consciousness.
I see. So it's basically the Bhagavad Gita that made you question yourself.
I read the Bhagavad Gita, and 1 year after, I met my first teacher, who was a homeopathical doctor living in Antibes, and he had been a student of Gurdjieff when Gurdjieff spent his last years in Paris. And very naturally, I recognized him as my teacher, and every month I was driving from Paris to Antibes to see him. And at the age of 34, I met my second teacher.
I see, that's very interesting. Um, One of my questions was, what was the mechanism that triggered the research in you? And just from listening to you, it seems like it's partly your teacher and partly your inner desire.
The teacher was a fertilizer of my inner desire. I wanted to understand, is there something to be understood? Maybe there is something. And after the Bhagavad Gita, I always spend a bit of time reading. And I discovered after a few years that they're all saying the same thing. I mean, Christian, Sufi, Indian, Chinese, Taoism, Buddhism, it's all pointing toward the same direction. But that was an intellectual understanding. And of course, the intellectual understanding is the map of the road. The idea is to hit the road, but you need to have a good map. So all those books are map, and that's the way it started.
I see. That's fascinating. You talk a lot about the breakthrough. Can you tell me what is a breakthrough?
I use the term breakthrough because I think it's lighter than awakening, enlightenment, the kingdom of heaven. The breakthrough is a collapse of the psychological structure, the collapse of the ego. In Plato's term, you get out of the cave, you drop the personae, the mask we all carry. So the breakthrough is just dropping everything we identified with.
Exactly. Is there a natural occurrence in the breakthrough? I mean, can anyone achieve it? Um, Maybe you can tell me how you went through breakthrough and how it happened.
First, can anyone achieve it? Every sperm can make it to the ovula. Every salmon egg can turn into a salmon and go upriver. We all have the potential to make it. For me, the first time it happened, I was 26, and I was reading a philosopher named Vevuve, who teach Chan Buddhism. Uh, He's quite known. He's published at the Hong Kong Press. And at the same time, I was going to the Cathedral of Chartres. And I did that 3.5 months. And after 3.5 months of that, how could I put it? That treatment, going to Chartres every day, reading Vévouvé 1 hour, 2 hours, going and meditate in the cathedral 1 or 2 hours, I was thinking about the dynamic subject-object. Because everything in duality is related to a subject and to an object. And one cannot exist without the other. I mean, it's a pair of opposites. In order to have an object, you need to have a subject. And then I realize that when I conceive the subject, through that conception, I'm making it an object. So the subject can never be seized, because the fact of conceiving it turns it into an object. So if the subject cannot be conceived, the question was, where is the object? And then my ego could not have any grabbing point, any identification, and everything collapsed for a good 25 minutes. That was my first breakthrough. And for 25 minutes, I was one with everything. Fear had gone. Thoughts were not there. The sense of being one with everything was there. And after 25 minutes, my ego reconstructed itself through identification. The next breakthrough happened 12 years after.
That's amazing. Did this breakthrough change your life? And if it did, can you explain how?
This first breakthrough really changed my life. It made me realize that what I was looking for was a reality, that all those maps I was reading were pointing toward the same thing, that it was universal. I had encountered a part of me which could not die because it's never born. So, of course, that understanding, owning that at a deep level, did accelerate my practice. And on the other hand, Vévouvé, Terence Gray, certainly the philosopher who influenced me the most, lived and died in Monaco. And that's certainly one of the reasons why I spent the 20 last years here. Because it's strangely enough, there is a connection. There is a connection to non-dualistic philosophy here.
Yes, it looks like you came out of Plato's cave.
For 25 minutes.
So you wrote this book, which I'm reading and I'm still reading, How to Get Out of This World Alive. You talk about your system, the 4Ds in it, which are distancing, discernment, disidentification, and discrimination. Can you tell me how you got all those elements together?
Well, those elements are bits and pieces which are very, very classical, because what I call distancing, it's the instauration of attention the Buddha used. It's a callback of the self Gurdjieff used. It's always the same concept. You find them in mysticism. And I think it's interesting to see the mystic not as representative of system of belief, but as scouts who have explored our possible evolution. So distancing is the observation of yourself, and you find this concept in the position of the witness of Advaita Vedanta. You find this concept elsewhere. It bears different name, but you find the same concept. Discernment is drilling. Discernment is a psychological work when you go through your repressed layer. When you have a level of timidity, you have fear of rejection. Below fear of rejection, you have low self-worth. We are made of layers. So discernment is to drill through the layers. Disidentification is a result of distancing and discernment. You let go. You just let go. And discrimination is the very heart of metaphysical inquiry, when you question yourself with a question which technically has no answer today. Who am I? What am I? What is consciousness? What is duality? What is the ultimate subject? Is there anything such as an ultimate subject? What is the difference between inside and outside? Those are metaphysical questions. So in this system, it's a combination of psychological drilling where you go where you don't want to go because you see the resistance when you work on yourself. Your ego is just a defensive system. So you trouble your own defense. And then, very naturally, you ask yourself the last question. Who am I? Who perceive? Is there a perceiver? What is perception? And all of a sudden, everything collapses. And the first thing you realize when everything collapses is you have always been there. You are there. You're free from time. You're free from space. Consciousness just got out of the maze. It's prison break. You got out of your prison, which is nothing else but your conditioning.
This gives a lot of hope to listen to you saying that. You indirectly you answered to my other question. I was going to ask you if you invented your 4D, but from what I hear, it's basically a recollection of.
Yes, I did put them in order. I created that order, but you will find that elsewhere. What I did invent, create, is a bit different, and you know it very well.
How would you suggest one use your book?
The book is a map, and to get on the road of the knowledge of yourself, you have to have a good map. And so your book, this book, will tell you the technique, practical technique to observe yourself, practical technique to drill into yourself. They will give you the key to use your dream and to stimulate your metaphysical questioning. But
Yes.
you are quite familiar with the dream work.
I am, and also with your book, because I keep reading it almost every other month. In the book, you write a lot about guilt and fear. Can you tell me more about it? It seems to be really the base.
Your ego is there to protect the vulnerable child. What is a vulnerable child? You are born, you have the shock of birth. Shock of birth is your first identification. It's your encounter with what is you and what is not you. When you were in your mother's womb, you were at one with the amniotic liquid. You were connected to your mother's thoughts, your mother's feeling, but you did not have the sense of the two. So all of a sudden, you have the shock of birth and you encounter what is not you. So your ego mechanically constructs itself through identification to protect that vulnerability, because when you have two, you have to have conflict. So your ego is there to manage your fear and to manage what you have repressed. Guilt seems to be the best available concept to tag the most repressed energy. Most of the time, we do not see it, because the task of the unconsciousness is to hide it. But if you observe well other people, how we function, you'll be able to spot it. You'll be able to spot the tip of the iceberg appearing on the surface. When a child is 3, 4, something is broken, mechanically we'll say it's not me. Or if later on the parents divorce, the child will blame himself. Mechanically, the most repressed layers of guilt will find an identification, and the child will blame himself for something he has nothing to do with. And later on, if there is a war, and we know very well when a number of soldiers dies and a few survive, they have survivor's guilt. We had that after the concentration camp. We have that when there is a human drama. Mechanically, the guilt, the repressed guilt, comes out and takes an identification, takes a grabbing point. Because the task of the ego, to maintain itself, it has to maintain a grabbing point. It has to maintain an identification. And you will spot that with many mystics. You remember the Buddha, before his awakening, saw Mara, an army of demons. I mean, that was a psychotic phase where guilt created that psychotic phase. The ego created that psychotic phase in order to hold on to something. You have the same thing with Jesus who sees Satan in the desert 3 times. So I think guilt is the best available concept to tag our most repressed energy. But if we really look at it, guilt is crystallized repressed fear. Right above guilt, we have the fear. Usually above, we'll have anger. So we really function by layers. And exploring ourselves is to explore the layers.
Exactly. You say there is an inner war within ourselves. Can you tell me what is this war inside us?
Our way to manage the conflict linked to fear. When you have the two, you have fear. You have to deal with the other. You have to deal with what is not you. And so this fear is managed non-stop. So we have that war within ourselves because the task of our ego is not to let go. And if we want freedom, the breakthrough, that means the death of our ego. And to a degree, our ego knows that and will keep on using lures, decoys, in order to maintain its position. That is a war between consciousness who wants to arise and the old logic which wants to keep you where you are. That's why so few people really change.
Yeah, how do you become aware of this war inside of you?
By the crisis you create, by the bad choice you make.
That's great. What can you, what to do to win this war?
Apply distancing, observe yourself, understand that you're fully responsible of your life. It's never somebody else's fault. Your life is a result of the choice you make. Understand the logic which drives your choice.
Okay, so that are the what the enemies are. It's basically your bad choices, the way you look at life.
Yes, absolutely. Your life is a result of your creation. You have a life because you made a numbers of choice. But it's very easy to understand that first, usually people are on repeat. They make the same kind of pattern. And to a degree, when you make a choice, your ego knows what you're going to find below the door you are opening. You certainly had a friend. I'll give an example. You have a friend, it's a charming lady. She's in love. She wants to introduce you a new boyfriend. And you clearly see this is not going to work. You clearly see, you try to tell her. Of course, she won't listen. She's identified with her projection. And 2 years after, she hits a heartbreak wall and her life do not function. Well, it's very clear that a part of her, to a degree, knew what the result of that choice she was making.
Yes, of course. Let me change quickly subject. We work a lot with dreams. We come during our sessions with our dream book, and then we interpret the dreams. Can you tell me, or our audience, how they function, what's their message, where they come from?
Well, when you start writing your dream and working with your dream, you see how amazing it is. Because your upper self, let's call it your upper self, a part of you, I think your upper self will be good. A high level of unseen consciousness every night delivers a message using your own symbolism in order to help you to move in your maze. You are always facing what dysfunction. Because this war we have with ourselves is like a trench war. We are made of layers. So you take a trench, you take another trench, and at one moment you make the breakthrough. When you break the front, you break the ego structure. It collapses. You get out of Plato's cave. But before that happens, we are trench by trench. We have to take those trench. How you dysfunction with women, how women dysfunction with men, your relation to money, all that will be pointed out by the dream. And when you really understand that your upper self speaks to you using your symbolical language, whether you listen to it or not. You listen to the message or not. But once you really get the message, if you don't listen to it, that means you'll keep on, as you know, having the same kind of dream again and again and again. You're very experienced with the work, with dream.
Yes, and I remember the first time we talked about dreams, and I remember saying I can't remember my dreams. And you said, just take a piece of paper and a pen, and before you sleep, you say, I'm going to remember my dream. And next day, it happened exactly like that. And since I write almost every day, I write down a dream.
Do you remember, for the first few years we worked together, I was asking you regularly, is that your upper self speaking to you, or am I brainwashing your brain? And how long did that take you to really get the message and to really be sure 100% it's your upper?
It took me over 4 years to be sure it was not you, but my upper self.
But that is the right attitude. You should never believe anything. You are a scientist of yourself working in your lab.
Mm-hmm.
You have a physical lab, you have a psychological lab, you have a dream lab, you have a metaphysical lab. It's not to believe in the teacher, it's to use the tool of the teacher to validate what you validate in yourself. It's like that, bit by bit, you raise your level of consciousness.
Yes, and I'm glad you talk about scientists, because I was going to introduce this book written by a scientist, Peter Fenwick, who wrote a book about you, about your ability to give energy. Can you tell me a bit about what he did with you, and then about how you give energy?
Well, you were there. You went to
Yes.
Rome when we did the science, I remember, with a few students, and we were in the lab in that university in Rome. Well, if I let go and connect, it's like a click. Energetically, something appears. It'd be really interesting. You describe what appears.
So when I look at you and I go into a meditation state, I see colors around you. They emanate around your head, and sometimes they go in the room. And when I'm in the group, some John and Chris, who are more longer students than me, they see much more color, sometimes all over the room.
Do you see how the color speaks to you? How they deliver another message? Not like the dream, but through another field, it gives message according to what color and how it appears.
Exactly. We have your archetype, and we have a code. We know what it means, and it confirms the dreams.
It confirms we are designed to evolve.
So when you give energy, you basically are
I do nothing.
absent.
I do nothing. It's an inner step back within myself, and I just do nothing.
When you say you do nothing or you are absent, how do you explain that for people who don't know you?
Well, it's very easy to let go of thoughts. The basic technique to let go of thoughts is to unify three fields, namely the weight of your body on the armchair, the vision you have of me, the sound of my voice. There is a little step back. Instead of being identified with thoughts, you're identified with three sensory fields. You keep unified. And mechanically, your thoughts are further away. You're less taken by them, right?
Right.
Well, it's just the same thing a few levels higher. It's an inner step back.
You encourage meditation. Can you tell us how is it to be done? Understand is to stop the thinking process. How often should one meditate? Is there a technique, or could it be any way?
The technique is a desire to know yourself. The technique is to be the observer of yourself. You're the scientist of consciousness of yourself. And when you sit quietly, you see thoughts. And you step back from the thinking process. And you just stay a neutral observer and just note what happened. And at one moment, really nothing happened. Just being there.
The motto of your school is to see in oneself what one does not want to see. Can you tell me how to do that?
Well, the ego is at war. So to do that is to have a real desire to know yourself, to be disciplined. To be disciplined is to practice meditation, write your dream, and read a bit of metaphysics to sharpen your ability to question yourself. And when something happened in life, is just a new experiment with yourself in order to understand yourself. The idea is not to withdraw from life. The idea is to live to the full, live your nature of being a human being, which is to be a sophisticated monkey, maybe.
Yes. You want us to see our psychological blockages. What do you do for that?
Well, first you have to own them. And to own them is when you see mechanically you are on repeat, you're hitting the same heartbreak wall, and this crisis, you don't want that again. You want to change. You don't want to have the same repetition of that. So you have to look for the primary causes. And the primary causes are always in our basic trauma, how we were built when we were a child, our relation with our mother, with our father, with our brother, the hidden family secret, everything which is unspoken, all that has to come at the level of consciousness. And the idea is to see that as an interesting journey. And of course, in that sense, we are back to the trench war. The ego will not want to. Why do you repressing? Because it's painful to a degree. So working on yourself is a little painful when you deal with a resistance, but at the end of the day, it's much less painful than to be on repeat and to hit the same heartbreak wall.
Yeah, I see that. Just let me ask you about identification. It seems to be a pillar of our construction.
Our ego only exists in the two. You remember one of the first phrases of the Bible, you shall not eat the fruit of the tree of good and bad, otherwise you'll die. You will not get into the two. So we have to be in a relation subject-object. We are always in a relation subject-object. My eyes and what I see, my ear and what I hear, my brain and what I think. So the primary task of the psychological structure is to keep us in the realm of the two. But we can only embrace the realm of the one if we die at the realm of the two. So to explore ourselves is to understand how our ego is constructed, our mechanism of identification is constructed. I am a man, I am a woman, I am a royal highness, I am a peasant. Where am I in the hierarchy? We are there. It's always a struggle for power because we may deny the hierarchy, but we always want to be higher in the hierarchy. You don't have that problem. You were born at the very top. But if you look at a society where a society was as equal as possible, it's the USSR at the time of Brezhnev. You could have been a great doctor, or you could have been a skilled workman. You will have the same wages. But you had 200 family, the Politburo, a few general, who lived in special building, who had special dacha, who had a complete different life. So whatever the system is, the task of that monkey is to have power and climb the hierarchy. That's the way we function. That's the way the ego function. And it's only if we accept ourselves as we are that we have a chance to go deeply in the understanding of the mechanism which drives us.
Yes, fascinating. You make us read metaphysics. What are we gaining from that?
The pleasure of shaking yourself at mid-sentence. When you read my book, Marriage, Vevuve, all of a sudden you read a page, you read a line, and you are shaken by what you read. Well, if you become addicted to that shaking, at one moment, you don't know when, a moment of grace, this shaking will come to a point that everything will collapse and consciousness will be free. Free from what? Free from its identification.
You often say that working on oneself is a sport. Can you elaborate a bit?
Yes, it's a very dangerous sport for the ego. And when you see it's a sport, you practice a sport. Your level of identification is not as strong. It's an amusing game to know yourself. Very dangerous game for the ego, so the ego will resist. But it's like when you ski very fast, or it's like when you drive very fast. There is something a little dangerous and exciting about it. Well, as a seeker, you can come to a point where you are shaken at mid-sentence, or when you really get the message of a dream which shakes you, you get addicted to that. Because in fact, we can only shift from one addiction to another addiction. And the best possible addiction is a seeker, well, to my understanding.
Yes, it's uplifting thought. Another thing you say often is to love oneself where you don't love yourself.
In your repressed fear, in your repressed guilt, we don't love ourselves. And the most healing energy is love. Usually we acknowledge we don't love ourselves if we are not completely zombie. We repeat the same crisis. Why do I have that crisis? Why did I choose that girl who doesn't make me happy? Why did I make that business deal which is a failure? It's clearly come from a part of you where in your logic you don't love yourself.
Exactly. And our society kinds of always put the blame on others. How do you think we should really go about that? Because your teaching, it's not really available if you don't hear about it. It's not taught in schools when you're young. I think in India, probably people are much more aware of this kind of thinking.
Yeah, but they are locked in another system. Society, in order to function, has to create a moral code. So religion was the backbone of moral code for centuries and centuries. In the West today, the moral code are changing. It's not so much religion which seems to be running the show. It's political correctness, which is another moral code which did not exist 30 or 40 years ago. So it's a dynamic which evolved. We have to match society in order to live, but we must not be taken by the identification the moral code will provide. I think the basic things is do to others what you like the others to do to you. And if you just apply that, you have your own code and you will be basically a good person.
Yes. I understand you're writing not a second book, but a book about dreams.
Yes, I think really everybody dreams. And what is fascinating, it's how we are all designed to evolve. You work with a Freudian shrink, you'll make Freudian dream. You work with a Jungian shrink, you'll have Jungian dream. Working with my dream system, with my archetype, there is a symbolism with numbers, there is a symbolism with water, snow, but mainly it's you. It's your symbolism. When you, I don't know, we must have done a few thousand of dream. You have
Yes,
listened to thousands of dream,
absolutely.
you and the other student. It's quite fascinating how it speaks to you. What's your understanding about what dream brings you?
Definitely, it's a roadmap. It's an instruction what to do if I want to evolve. And it's daily, and it's always repetitive. And as long as I don't do what I'm supposed to do, I have the same messages, but in different ways. They're always different. They're always new. They're always highly intelligent messages that I have to work a bit to understand with your help. And
You're
then the
able
message
to
goes
you're able
in
to do it yourself now.
most of the time.
Do you see that there is a part of you who loves you unconditionally?
Absolutely.
But the more you connect to that part, the more you evolve, and the more you will make happy choices.
Yes.
Because you only made losing choices when you are driven by your most repressed structure. If you raise your level of consciousness, your life gets a bit better because the choice you make are not linked to the same roots. you've raised your level of consciousness.
Yeah. One last question. This book is in different languages. How many languages is it?
We have it in French, Spanish, Italian, German, and there is a Russian version, but the Russian version is not online as yet.
It was wonderful to interview you, Alain. Thank you very much for your time. Very instructive, and I hope that many people will see this interview and will be interested in reading your book, because at the end of the day, I think it's the most important work we can do on ourselves.
Well, it has been an interesting exchange. Uh, Very clearly, you were in a different position from the position we usually are when we work. Um, do you want to test the energy and see what happens?
Absolutely.
Okay, you stay connected with me.
There's definitely a white halo around you, a bit blue-green also in the back, and I could feel energy on top of my head.
Very good. Well, let's hope this film will
Thank you.
help people.
Yes,
Thank you, Your Holiness.
you're very welcome. Thank you, Alain.